Today I wanted to talk about what can transform your game, and they're actually tiny little things. I just wanted to go over a few of them today that I've been working with recently, and they've just kind of snapped and given me that instant transformation that I've been looking for. So the first thing that I've been looking at recently is player guidance and how we can essentially tell the player what they're supposed to do in the game without making it stupidly evident. So I think that when it comes to player guidance, it's either be very explicit with it, which my last game Grub Truck does a bit. It's quite an explicit tutorial of like, you do this, you do that, it ends up doing this. But in my new game, I wanted to kind of remove that friction and that barrier as much as possible. So the way that I've actually gone about doing that is primarily just this tiny little addition of adding outlines to interactable objects. So I created this whole system that acts as a base for interactability in the game. So certain objects are interactable, others aren't. The first kind of clue to the player that you can do something with this is they see a little F comes up in the center of their screen on the object they're looking at, which is obviously just an indication. You see this in loads of different games, and a lot of games, especially in simulation world, have outlines around them as well. And this was my brother's idea to implement this. And literally as soon as I added the outline to all the interactable objects, it just makes the game feel so much better. It's so clear that this object is interactable, this one is not. It just makes it very easy for me to explain to the player what you can and can't do, how you can do it without even having to say any words. I think as well, to add on to this, it kind of makes the player feel a bit clever in a funny sense of way, like they've discovered their own way of working the game. They've not been told you must follow this tutorial and use WASD to move, you know. They've just kind of figured it out, so it feel a bit more personal and like they've learned something, and they'll be more likely to hook onto a game. I mean, I'm sure you can think of lots of games where maybe you've played a tutorial and you get bored because you're just being overloaded with all this information that you probably half of it you're not even going to use. When you play games that allow you to discover how it works, it's a lot more addictive. Take games like Minecraft, you figure it out whilst you're playing it. You see a tree in front of you, you go left click it, you realise you punched the tree to knock it down and get the wood. With that wood, you then figure out, oh, I can make things with this, and then it all kind of comes together. I think it kind of comes from that human instinct thing of like, you know, when we were cavemen, you had to figure it out. And even now, like, you have to figure things out, and I think that we as humans and the human brain just loves learning things, and if we can do that in a format of games, it makes it a lot more addictive. I think as well, you don't have to make it as obvious as I have in my game. I think it just kind of matches my style of game. If you're doing a game where it's maybe like more story based or dialogue based, you can do more like environmental hints and guidance. So maybe like a light shines on a certain door more so than the other doors, or there's an obstacle like a pallet of crates that's in the way this way. So you're kind of making the player follow a linear path without actually making it completely linear. You could even do it so that it's like world dialogue. So people come across characters or NPCs and they're talking about something and the player wants to go and investigate that. Or it could even just be like a broken fence. Like our eyes are naturally attracted to like, what is through that gap? I can see that it's not a flat wall. There must be something there. I'll go and have a look. I think another really small thing that you can do to your game to have a huge impact with hardly any work is to just kind of look at your UI. UI has a huge effect, and my last game didn't have the best of UIs. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't amazing. At the same time, I think it's a very artistic thing. So if you're not very good at art like me, it is going to be quite challenging. However, there are more tools now to kind of get good at that. I can't open this pack. Oh, and now it dropped. So for example, following a theme of UI that kind of matches what you're trying to achieve as a setting is really important. So like with the new game, it's like in a cozy, chill, cute kind of setting. So I've replicated that with the UI. So if you have a look at this UI here, I've actually kind of curved the edges and I've made the font similar. The colors are really gentle. There's no harshness about it. It doesn't feel like a Windows XP browser. I'm not artistic. So the way I actually designed it was I literally just went to AI and said, hey, give me an idea for this, help me design it. I want curved edges, I want the color palette to match this. And then I went through and I did make it myself, but I'm much better with art when I can actually see what I'm trying to make. So if you're like me and like you can physically do the art, but you're just not very good at thinking of it or like doing it on paper when you've not got a point of reference, definitely use AI. It's so handy. And like I've not obviously used AI content in the game, I just had it to help me inspire the design of the UI. You've not actually changed any functionality, you've not actually scripted anything extra, you've not done any extra work. I mean, obviously physically you have, but in terms of like game development, you've not done anything more. And again, you can maybe hint towards like that guidance for the player through the UI as well. Maybe you could have a button that's bigger and brighter than the others. There's lots of ways that you can kind of go about that. But I think ultimately with UI, you want it to feel like it's part of the world. Obviously in real life, we don't necessarily have UI to interact with when we're just going about our daily lives. I think we need to make it feel that it's not abrupt. It doesn't kind of break that immersion for the player. It needs to all feel like one cohesive world. And then there's sound, which is rather convenient. This is currently what I'm doing. I did quite a bit of sound on my degree at uni when it came to like game cinematics. And I think that's really important and sometimes overlooked is the really subtle background atmospherics. Now, obviously with game development, we do need to be really cautious of like performance and how much storage and resources we're using for the sound effects. However, if you can afford it, and I think in like more low poly games, it's a little bit easier to be able to do that. And I think that's sometimes why low poly games have such a good atmosphere. Yes, the art style and the mechanics, obviously, but I think that the music and the sound effects can sometimes absolutely sell you the game. And I think that sound effects is just such an underrated part. To give you an example, I think that a huge thing that's worked for me on my new project is having the voice announcements in the background when a train is approaching, like this.
Service to Willowbrook Halt.
Having it so that different environments change the sound quality or like the timbre of it.
Form 1 for the 10. Service to Willowbrook Halt.
And also just like the sound of a train passing. Trains are still going and coming, even if you're not in the shot. If you're in the village, they're still existing and you can see them in the distance. So you need to make sure that the sound, well, I need to make sure that the sound is actually matching up to what is going on in the world. And even things like trees rustling in the distance. And I think that, yes, the player's not going to go, oh, wow, I love the sound of that rustling tree. Well, I might, but not many players will do that. However, if it's not rustling, but it's swaying, it's just going to create this boundary of you're not immersed, you're not in this world, you're playing a game. And I think for the style of games that I'm doing, and probably what you're doing, you really need the player to be immersed as much as possible to make it as fun as possible. And I think that's ultimately what all of these little small additions are doing. It's like that immersion. The player needs to feel like they're in the game. They're not just playing a piece of software. They're playing something that's actually another world for them to explore. I think as well, you need to think of sound effects in like layers. Your brain isn't going to pick apart all the different layers of like, yes, that train is making that sound and this tree is making that sound. I can hear the footsteps over here. And your brain isn't going to pick up on that, but it is going to pick up when you're using one sound effect for the step. It is going to pick up when you're in a train station but you can't hear the trains. Your brain, when it all goes together nicely, is just going to go, yep, that's a train station. And it's such a small thing, but it's so important because it makes a huge difference. And I think also sound effects can obviously be huge for guiding the player, like in our first part of if you want the player to know if you do this, it's good, have a little chime. Even like UI feedback of like you click a button and you hear, nice. And it's that kind of audible feedback of I'm doing this and it is doing what I want it to do. And it just gives that player sense that the game works, you know? Because when you click something and you don't get that feedback of visual or that audio feedback, it just feels so wrong. It feels like something's missing. And I think that these small little additions make a huge impact. So the next time you're working on your game, I think it's really important to sometimes just look, okay, what is this tiny little thing I can do that will actually have a huge impact? Because sometimes you'll be looking at your game and you're thinking something's not right. What new feature can I add? And I think that sometimes features are going to make it worse, depending on the game and whatever and what the feature is. I think maybe take a step back and actually just play it. Pretend you're the player playing it for the first time. What stands out? Is the UI clashing with the world? Is the sound effects not quite matching with what's happening? Do you not feel immersed? Why don't you feel immersed? And I think that these tiny little adjustments fix that. So I hope this has given you an interesting insight into what small little details you can add to your project. And it's definitely helped my projects as to making them more immersive and feel like a more complete game. It's not a complete game, but like a vertical slice that feels good. And I think that's the main thing, is like it just needs to feel good. Feel and immersion. They're your two main things. And also add a highlight because, oh my God, it was a game changer. I forgot to say, thanks for watching. And if you have Discord, please come and join us on Discord. And there's other developers in there as well. So if you just want feedback or some ideas, come join. Thanks for watching. Never try and do TLC on your guitar or change strings when it is the summer and it is bloody hot and you're in a conservatory. It's the worst idea I've ever had. I'm sweating.